For those who are counting, there are now 9 days till Christmas. Hope it's going well for you so far. This is the third Sunday in Advent as we're making our way closer and closer to the celebration of Christ's birth. And for all the high spirits of the season, it's also about as frenetic a time as we have. So the challenge is to keep ourselves somehow grounded in the midst of everything going on with this core story of preparing for Christ to come. This third Sunday in Advent has a different feel from the first two, which are pretty stern and penitential. If you can see it, the Advent wreath candle that we lit today is a bright pink, a bright, cheerful, happy pink compared to the penitential, darker purple candles there. The theme for today is not repentance at all, but hope and expectation. The great word for today is that this is Gaudete Sunday, or Stir-Up Sunday, and Enthusiastic Sunday, as for all the penitence and preparing and yearning, we are expectant and getting ready for something wonderful to come. Listen to the words of the prophet Isaiah in a lesson appointed for today that we didn't read so that we could hear a Year of the Bible lesson. You will hear about that in our forum just after the service. This is about the one you didn't hear. It's addressed to a defeated nation, a nation in a long, centuries-long advent of waiting for Christ, for God, for the Messiah to come. Their temple has been destroyed, their leaders have been taken away, and everything they'd built and depended on and counted on was lost, their leaders taken into exile. So you would expect an aching lament over what's been lost, but instead, this is what you get. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall blossom and rejoice. They shall see the glory of the Lord and the majesty of our God. So strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come to save you. In a time of desolation, Isaiah declares that there is a future for the people of Israel, one that they cannot begin to imagine, but that is coming. Flowers in the desert, water breaking forth in the wilderness. It sounds, doesn't it, like denial or fantasy. But prophets, poets, and great leaders don't simply stare at a set of facts and allow that to define their final truth. They know that we humans live inside stories, narratives, ways of interpreting the facts of our lives, and at least as important as any particular hard truths is the story we tell about what's going on in our lives and in the world around us. The brutal facts of apartheid and an overwhelmingly oppressive regime in South Africa were clear. But Nelson Mandela and his companions chose to live by a different story, a story of freedom and liberation and justice. I remember several years ago, soon after moving to Washington, D.C., spending a full day riding around some of the lowest income neighborhoods in the city. I saw a few signs of new development and communities coming back from hard times, but I saw so much that was troubling there. How many people were being pushed out of their homes by rising prices, how much danger there was on the streets, how D.C. has the highest infant mortality rate in the country. And what struck me most clearly was the contrast between two stories at work in the city. You could see the story of despair and hopelessness pervading whole communities. After so many years, even generations of dashed dreams and broken families and violence, many had just given up. And so neighborhoods were falling apart, and drug dealers were everywhere, and schools were overwhelmed with youngsters used to living in chaos. But that same day, I saw a distinctly different story in action. When I stepped into Fairby Hope elementary school in the heart of a rundown neighborhood. The second I stepped through the door, I was warmly greeted by a firm, strong, busy staffer and a receptionist who boomed out the second I walked through the door, "Welcome to Hope. When you come in here, you're coming into hope," she said. And she would tell every student as he or she walked through the door. She went on to say, "We tell our students again and again, here we believe in you. Here we know you can make it." And I walked through classrooms of bright-eyed 5- and 6-year-old students in their burgundy shirt uniforms, watching them being firmly and lovingly taught by their teachers. This was a place living a different story. I realized I'd stepped into a different kind of realm, even in the same neighborhood, a realm I began to think of as a kingdom of hope. When you enter into that world, you step into an entirely different way of seeing the world from the neighborhoods around, and it shapes the way the students and the faculty talk, the way they treat each other, what they expect of each other, and what they look for in the future. It matters what kind of story we're living in. The Fairview Hope School was only blocks away from other schools with soaring absentee rates and dismal academic performances. The difference wasn't that some schools had smarter kids and others had kids not so bright. The difference was one school was offering a kingdom of hope for their students, and the others were not getting anything like that at all. The people of Israel, captive in Babylon, believed they could trust Isaiah when he promised that blossoms will burst forth in the desert, because for centuries they had lived inside of that story of a God who was faithful, who would save them from slavery, who time and again had proven to be trustworthy. So Isaiah wasn't tossing out a fantasy with those bright, beautiful images of blossoming. He was telling his people, no, reminding his people of how God comes and renews again and again. Every Sunday when we enter Trinity Church, we're stepping into the kingdom of hope. We bring to our worship our questions, our own burdens and fears, and allow them to be gathered up into a great story of healing and expectation and a sense of a future. And through the life-changing work of our own Trinity Boston Foundation, more and more young people are beginning to claim and trust the story of hope that comes from our faith given to them. In fact, in the coming months, I hope Foundation leaders will continue to look for ways for us as Trinity parishioners to get glimpses of this kingdom of hope operating in our own building and within our midst. There's TEEP, of course, the Trinity Education for Excellence program that is a magnificent house of hope. In it, struggling young middle and high schoolers from across the city step into a new world where the expectations are high and work is demanding, but they're learning a new story when they're here. A story that tells them that they matter to God and to their mentors, and that they have their own contribution to make to the world. So they learn TEEP's 5 R's: respect, responsibility, restraint, reciprocity, redemption, that together make up a new story for their lives. And they see those values worked out day after day and slowly absorb them. Soul Train is using the simple act of running as a way to help youngsters set goals and achieve them, maybe for the first time in their lives, and have a sense of pride and accomplishment in what they're doing. And in a thrilling new effort, we at Trinity have developed a deep, significant relationship with the Dever McCormick School in Dorchester, a K-8 struggling school with 1,400 students K to 8th grade, a population that daily faces enormous challenges. But through individual counseling and coaching, And over time, we hope with the development of friendships and tutoring between Trinity parishioners and young students in that school, we hope to help the Dever McCormick become more and more a house of hope for 1,400 young people. This is all Advent talk we're having right now because it's all about the expectation that when a Messiah comes and a God comes into our lives, then what will pour forth is new life and new hope as people come and experience and take it in. Did you notice in our gospel lesson today what the signs of Christ's coming are? John the Baptist is sitting in a prison thinking everything is collapsing around him and wonders if Jesus is in fact the Messiah, sends a messenger out to ask, "Are you the one or shall we look for another?" And Jesus sends back saying, "Go tell John what you see and hear. The blind receive their light, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news preached to them." In other words, the signs that Christ is coming, that Christ has been born and will be born, are the signs of a world experiencing hope and healing and compassion and new life. One of the finest pictures of this kingdom of hope I've ever encountered is in a book by Ron Suskind called A Hope in the Unseen, an American Odyssey from the inner city to the Ivy League. It tells the story of a youngster living in southeast Washington, his father in prison for drug dealing for pretty much all of his growing up, his mother sometimes on welfare, sometimes holding down low-paying jobs. She is the one who's the pillar of his life. Cedric Jennings is his name, and he and his mother move from apartment to apartment when the money runs out. But through it all, he develops a fierce determination to break out of his world and to go to an Ivy League school. So he works constantly, taking all the abuse from his classmates of being called a nerd and a geek. Even his father calls him a straight-A mama's boy, and he gets harassed and beat up between classes. Cedric sets his sights on an MIT summer program for minority students, which they say is a stepping stone to admission to that school. But when he arrives, he finds himself so overwhelmed, so unable to pick up the cultural cues, even amongst middle-class minority students, that he just doesn't make it and falls away. But then after much struggle, he later is admitted to Brown University, struggles his way to graduation, and is now launched in a productive, healthy, life-giving work. Where did Cedric get his fiery determination to make something of his life? Well, from his mother, for sure, and from her fiery Pentecostal faith that has taught Cedric to trust in God. Also from a teacher, Mr. Taylor, who's always quoting Scripture to him and who tells him he needs to have hope in the unseen. "You're a special person, Cedric," Mr. Taylor would say to him. "It's not like you're so much smarter than the rest, but you're out for it. You're going to make it happen. You're determined, and that's the key." Cedric was living by a different story. The blind receive sight, and the dead are raised. Of course, you and I have our prisons too. Not as dramatic as Nelson Mandela's by a long shot, not as daunting as those students at the Dever McCormick School, but we know our dark spaces of loneliness and guilt and anger and mistakes and trouble at home and a sense of drifting and going nowhere. Advent's for us too, the invitation to step in to this kingdom of hope. This promise of a God who will walk with us and be with us, who has a future before us and will give us the courage to take the steps we need to take if we will pause and listen and ask. And that is the real story of our lives. And the wisdom and the wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. So strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees, and say to those who are of a fearful heart, "Be strong, Do not fear. Here is our God. He will come to save you.